I'm busy. Say hi to Mr. Smith.
No thanks.
She's all incognito. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna share my screen, and then well, actually, let's just talk real quick. How are you guys doing? Just religiously, how are you doing spiritually? Being stuck at home without church.
Yeah, I've been actually pretty good. Like when it comes to religion, because things have happened. I prayed to God for this one thing that happened, and He answered it. I would not talk about it now because it's a little too hard, but I'm glad that He answered it.
That's awesome. That's really awesome, Jacob. Good. Okay. How about you, Jonathan?
I started a Leviticus study. I had a Warren Worsby that I had, and I hadn't started yet, so I just started to do that just to stay in daily.
Cool. Good.
And then keeping everyone in prayer.
Good. Good, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been it's been weird. Even though we've had so much more time, I found myself over the last couple of weeks reading the Bible less. Like when I'm really busy, I'll be like, okay, like I have priorities, so I'll pencil God in, and like before I go to bed, usually I'll spend some time with my wife reading. But I feel like now that we're just kind of like floating from day to day, I haven't been as dedicated as I was, which is really ironic,
Yeah.
I've been forcing myself to read. I've been reading Micah, and so my core group, I have I lead a core group of guys from UB Free, and so I met them last week on Zoom, and I was just like, hey guys, let's dive into a book and let's do this together, and they agreed. So we chose Micah from the Old Testament, which has been interesting. It's not a book I would have chosen, but one of the guys did, and it's pretty much God being like, you forsook me and therefore I'm going to kill you all kind of book, And so not really spiritually uplifting, but it is a good warning, and it does kind of fit in with the message we're talking about today, which is kind of cool. Should we start? Ready to jump in?
Ready?
Let's do it. Okay, can I share my screen, Jonathan? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll take us back to our PowerPoint that we were reflecting on.
I'm gonna close my door.
Okay. So this is a two-part message. We've already kind of looked over part one, right? So I'll give a quick review, and then we'll move on into kind of like some new ideas. And it's kind of nice actually that we have a small group so we can talk about it amongst the three of us if we want to. So if you remember Proverbs chapter 5, it starts with, it's pretty much King Solomon giving, remember we discussed, I think he's an older man at this point. I feel like he's in the latter days of his life, and he's reflecting back on his own personal experiences, and he's sharing that wisdom with anyone who's going to read this, obviously, right? Passing down 2,000 years later to us as a younger generation. But he's giving us, he is the man who is supposedly the wisest man that ever lived. And it's him imparting his wisdom and understanding and knowledge and judgment to us, right? What's up, Isabella? How are you?
Hello.
So we're taking from that. Remember, we talked about how kind of it's really important to have an older mentor who can impart that wisdom to you. Whether it be, hopefully, I mean, your mom and dad can definitely do that, but I'm thinking more in like a spiritual sense, and having someone who's older that will come alongside you and put their hand around, like their arm around you and really guide you through life, right? And how important that is. And then we talked about how sin itself is always tempting. It always looks so good. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it, right? And so you have a lot of imagery here with this immoral woman who drips honey, and it's smoother than oil. So we know that honey as a metaphor is very, very sweet, and it's very, very tempting, right? And it's something that we want to consume. We can even overindulge on. Same with the smoother than oil, which is a delicacy of this time, which would also be like money. But he tells us right here with further imagery that in reality, even though it seems sweet like honey, it's actually bitter as wormwood. And remember, we talked about how wormwood is poison, and it leads to your death, as the two-edged sword here is the symbolism there. And so how our sin is so tempting, it's really easy for us to fall into and be consumed with. However, it always leads to guilt, shame, and sorrow, right? It's coming back to us?
Yeah.
So then looking at our next, and here he continues that metaphor. It's going to lead us to death. It will lead us to hell. It leads us to unstable paths. And then we talked about how he's like, hear my words, children. Again, we have the idea that he is an older man and he's imparting wisdom from his own experience. So even though people tell us sometimes that we need to experience life ourselves in certain ways, we need to go to college and do drugs and have sex and do these things, when he's telling us, no, we actually don't, learn from his wisdom and his mistakes. And we can bypass those sins. And then this is, I believe, where we left off. We ran out of time. So he continues, and he's like, if you continue and are enticed into temptation, if you allow yourself to be led astray by the immoral woman or by any kind of sins that tempt you, your honor, you're going to leave your honor to others. Your years will be given to the cruel one. You're going to be, aliens will take away your wealth. And aliens would mean foreigners. Your labor is going to go to the house of a foreigner, and you will mourn when your flesh and your body are consumed. And we talked about how this is all this imagery is leading us into the idea of slavery and how we are going to become slaves to our sin, right? Which leads us to our next one. We'll all skip some of these. And this is kind of where we left off. Our last slide was sin. The difference between slavery to sin and slavery to Christ is that sin strips us of our self-worth and leaves us empty, left with only guilt, shame, and regret. Whereas slavery to Christ fulfills us, gives us purpose, hope, and glory. Yeah? Okay, so that was a good recap. We feel good? Awesome. Okay. So then that's leading us into the remainder of Proverbs chapter 5, which is verses 12 through 23. So he continues in that same thought. And he says, it's interesting, I love the pronoun change here, because now he's going to talk about it from our point of view, if we are led astray. So he's like, if you follow that woman, or if you are tempted by your sin and you let it consume you, you are going to end up saying this. And it's funny, think about, remember, it's his experience already. So I guarantee you that he has sinned in some part of his life. And we talked about how many concubines and wives he had, right? He had over 1,000, which is ridiculous. So I guarantee you at one time in his life, he stood back and said these very words after he committed that sin. And he says, how I have hated, so remember, this is you talking after you've sinned, you hated instruction and your heart despised correction. So people that tried to give you wisdom, people that tried to give you their own experience, you turned your back on them, right? And you didn't listen to what they said. You have not obeyed the voice of your teacher, nor did you incline the ear to those who instructed you. And this is the saddest part. You were on the verge of total ruin in the midst of the assembly and the congregation. So does anything out of these two lines, guys, does anything stand out to you?
I think it just highlights, like, with the assembly and congregation makes me think of, like, the family of believers and how there are literally people among us that are Christian and do believe in God, but are just can be really broken inside and not really believing everything God says that they are. I know I've been there, like, literally, like, recently. So that just, like, really speaks to that point. So, yeah, I think there's just always people there that need Jesus, even amidst us.
Yeah, good as well. Thank you. Good. Anybody else?
I would agree with what Isabel just said, because I do know a lot of people. Well, maybe not a lot, but I do know people who do believe in the Bible, but there were just some parts that they weren't didn't live up to, because again, they were broken people. I was one of them at one time. Like, I was angry, I was sad, I didn't know what to do with life. I questioned God. I was a mess, but then I began to look at the Bible more. I began to listen to my family more. I guess that's what helped me bring myself back up to my feet and not on my hands and feet, because my hands belong to the Lord.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Jacob.
For me, I kind of like what stands out to me. I agree with both Isabel and Jacob, and then even like with the people around, if we're kind of hate, like it says, hating instruction and kind of just doing our own thing, it could affect those around us and cause them to really be affected by what we're doing.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Jonathan. I agree with you guys, all three of you, absolutely. And in a different approach, and like the lens that I was looking at this too, you have the really negative here, which is like you were on the verge of total ruin in the midst, as in front of, right? the assembly and the congregation. And yeah, like Isabel said, like I believe that this is speaking of church, right? And like your family and family of believers, and how, guys, your sin, no matter how secret you think it is, it will always confront you and it will always find you. And people will always find out in the end, right? Like, can you really ever keep anything secret? Especially from God, right? We know obviously not. But I think that the secret sins that we have, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later too, is it will always come out. And especially when it comes out in confession, because I think that's the point here, is he's saying this out loud. So he's confessing this. And the best, and if you're like Amish, old school churches, like if you commit sin, you actually go in front of the congregation and you announce it. And you say, this past Tuesday, I fell into this specific sin and I regret it. I repent of it. Congregation, you forgive me. And as a group, they say, yes, we come up and we support you. We forgive you just as God does, right? Which is really cool. But how terrifying is that? To go up in front of everyone and be like, this is my deepest, darkest secret sin, and this is what I've been doing, right? We're going to get that a little bit later. But then this whole idea too here is, I love this word verge, is notice, did he like get consumed into ruin? Did he die? Did he go to hell? No, it says like he's on the verge of, and I think that that really speaks to the grace of our God as well. As like, even when we fall into this sin, and yes, we do ignore instruction, and yes, we do ignore the words of the Bible, and yes, like we reject God's voice, right? The Holy Spirit ministering in us. At the same time, when we do sin, it doesn't mean like God's done with us. He hasn't written us off, right? And so I love this. The word verge there speaks to me so beautifully, because it's like, I was teetering on that edge. Remember that metaphor I used for you guys about that car, the guy looking for the driver that was going up the mountain, and the road got narrow and narrow, right? And he's looking for that driver who's going to help him get up to his house safely every single day and not tear off. Even that guy that goes over to the edge and is tearing off, like, and he's, tiptoeing the line. Remember that this idea, it's a metaphor for temptation and sin. Even when you crossed that line, God hasn't written you off or pushed you over the edge yet, which is pretty beautiful. But go back to this point too really quick and move on. Like, I can tell you guys, there's been so many times in my life where I've committed a sin, and I've had to confess that to a friend, or I've had to confess that to a loved one or a mentor, and it broke my heart. Like, I remember a sophomore in high school, and it was the first time that I've ever done anything serious, like with a girlfriend sexually, right? And we didn't have sex, we didn't get that far, but just the idea of like, I know that it wasn't right for me to, let's say, to get to second base with her, right? And I remember crying to my mentor at the time. His name was Rene Mendoza. He was a leader at my church. And so I remember like going to him on Sunday, and he pulled me aside and I just wept. Like, I was crying. I was like, this is what I did this week, and I'm so ashamed. Like, I was led away with my sinful lust and temptation. And it was this idea though of like coming to him and confessing it though, and him talking me through it. And I got over it. And like, that's happened to me so many times. And guys, if you are struggling with sin, the best thing you could do is really share it with somebody and get that accountability. Yeah. Again, we'll move on. We'll come back to that. So then if you keep reading, it's awesome. Right after that point, he's like, dude, I was on the verge, the ruin, and I had to confess it. And this is, man, I regret not listening to my elders. And then he's like, if you don't lead yourself into temptation, if you don't sin, here's the beauty that's going to come. And if we'll read through these verses really quick, but I highlighted kind of the important imagery here, where he says, drink water. So instead of doing that, drink water from your own cistern, as in your own well, and running water from your own well. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be only yours, and not the foreigners or the strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of your youth, as a loving deer and a graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you at all times, and always be enraptured with her love. For why should you, my son, be enraptured by an immoral woman, and be embraced in the arms of a seductress? So looking at there's a lot of parallelism in this whole chapter. He starts with the negative, right? He's like, if you sin and you allow yourself to be led astray, you're going to become a slave. But all of these imageries here, what is maybe the main idea that Solomon's pointing out? Instead of being a slave, you're what?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so notice the parallelism of imagery throughout this chapter. The first half of the chapter talks about if you're led away by temptation, You're going to be working for other people. Your life's going to be taken away. Your wealth and your money and your wealth is going to be dispersed amongst the strangers of the land. And then he gets to, however, if you listen to my words and my instruction, here's what's going to benefit you, and here's what's going to happen. And so all of these imageries, what is actually being produced here, the image in your mind?
Like contentment.
Sorry?
Contentment.
Okay, yeah. Fulfillment, contentment, satisfaction, absolutely. What else? You get your own well. Your fountains will be blessed. Rejoice with your youth and the wife of your youth. She will satisfy you, which, yeah, you said contentment as well. It's freedom. It's straight up freedom. It's, man, everything that you do and everything that you work for and the life that you live is going to be wholly yours, and you will simplistically be able to enjoy it because you're doing it in the Lord.
That's really good.
And so the idea here, like the blessings and the fountains, this isn't him promising money. It's not him promising that everything in your life's going to be good. Yeah. But he's like, yeah, like you said, Isabel, it's you will be contented and you will be satisfied. And I love this too, like, because then he's talking about, remember, the adulteress and the immoral woman, and then he brings up wife, and he's like, dude, rejoice in the wife of your youth, the woman that and the man that you choose to marry, and be content with him and be content with her at all times, which is pretty beautiful here. So this is pro-marriage, which is ironic, again, coming from Solomon, who married 800 women and 300 concubines, but that's okay. But again, we're learning from his experience, right? Mm-hmm. And then we get to kind of the main point of the whole chapter. And guys, it's super weird that he throws this in here because seemingly it has nothing to do with anything, but I actually like the most important verse in the whole chapter. It says in verse 21, for the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. Like literally just throws this, bombs it, boom. And kind of a mic drop moment too, but how does this fit into the greater context of what he's saying? Because he's talking about like the immoral woman and being led away from temptation. And then he's like, but if you don't get led away from temptation, here's all the freedom you're going to enjoy. And then he's like, for the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. Why even say that right now?
Maybe because he's already gone like through, like this is the result of that, and that's the result of that, and then kind of tying it back into like, this is why, because like God actually sees it, and he made both of those things have their own certain outcome, whether good or negative, but like reminding him like God sees it, and that's where it's coming from, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Anybody else?
Yeah, sort of what Isabel said. Yeah, you kind of have to be careful with the choices that you make, because you don't always got to think that about you, but think if this is what God wants, and if this is or isn't what God wants, then that means you should do it if it's good, but you shouldn't if you know it's bad. You got to choose carefully, because this is going to affect you in the future, and mainly you, and possibly even your loved ones.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
The way I kind of see it is also agreeing with both Jacob and Isabel. It says that for the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, so it's kind of like if he's there with us. So it's kind of like a reminder for us, like in anything that we're gonna choose, like think about it, like he's right there with us in that circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming from a humanistic point of view, does this verse scare the crap out of you?
Yeah.
Like, the ways
in a good way. Like,
yeah, in a good way, like if you're a sinner, in a bad way, right? If you're a righteous Christian, in a good way, for sure, right? But like the idea that God's eyes are always pondering every move you make, right? Which is, it's horrifying, but yeah, it's also like a blessing knowing that he is always there, for sure.
Yeah.
But guys, I think what the verse is getting at too, in addition to everything you guys have said, is that everything he's talked about previously in this chapter, it looks like it's about action. It's about being tempted and then drawn away by the immoral woman, or conversely, living in freedom and enjoying your wife or your husband, right? And living in the purity and simplicity of that. But I think what Solomon's telling us here is that the Lord's looking at your heart, and he's inspecting not only what you're doing, but also exactly like how you're feeling. And most of our sin, I would say, is an action. I would say most of our sin is thought. Would you guys agree?
Yeah.
It's when it comes to jealousy and anger and hatred and envy, right? And bitterness and yes, and that outpours in gossip, right? And that outpours in murder or in punching your little brother or sister, right? Something like that. But initially, every sin that we have, it's internal and it's of the conscious. And so I think that this verse is really important because it's telling us that even if we're not the person that's drawn away physically by that woman, if you're tempted to and you allow your mind or your heart to, are you still in sin? And does God still know it?
Mm-hmm.
And so this leads us, again, like I wanted to wrap back around to.
Uh-oh.
He froze.
He's gone.
Um,
He's just gone.
Uh,
That's a good word.
Here's kind of the application where I was like leaving off is like, what secret sin has enslaved you that's left you with that guilt and that shame and that regret that you're having a hard time breaking free from? And also the kind of secret sin that you don't want to share. Like if you told, let's say, your boyfriend or your girlfriend about it and you're fearful that they won't like you or that they'll be like, wow, she's a horrible person or he's a horrible person. Like, do you struggle with those? Like I'm sure everybody does in some way, right? And the idea of like, and it goes back to kind of the main idea is those are the exact sins that we have to share with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Or I mean, as many people, the better. Derek Webb, he's the lead singer of Caedmon's Call. He was. He said on like a press interview I was listening to, he's like, the best thing we could do as Christians is put all our worst sins, our worst parts about ourselves, put them in like a text message and then just put it all over social media. Announce it to the world. Get on the 5 o'clock news and tell everybody you can what sins you're dealing with, because I guarantee that gives you accountability. And every time everyone sees you, they're like, dude, how's that going? You know? And like and every time you think about committing that sin, you're like, dude, someone's gonna ask me about it. My best friend's gonna ask me about this. Of course I'm not gonna do it. Or my mentor or my boyfriend or my girlfriend, right? Like the more people you tell and you share that with, the more accountability you have. And I guarantee, guys, they're gonna come alongside you and lift you up and edify you and help you with that sin. Like it's the best thing you could do for yourself. And so I encourage you, I guess kind of leaving you with what, like a final thought is, if you're struggling and you feel enslaved to sin, share that. Open up with a best friend, with a mentor, okay? And I guarantee that will help. And then looking at it from a different point of view, I kind of was also thinking about it this way, is that the fact that our slavery to sin is so real, and it's more so real, I would say, for our unsaved family members and our friends and our neighbors. And the fact that they live in shame and emptiness every single day, and they're ignorant to the truth of their salvation from slavery, as well as how to find fulfillment and hope and joy. And so if we were in the classroom, I would like break us into small groups, and this would be really the question I would want to talk about is like, what are you actively doing to help free your neighbors, your family members, your best friends who aren't saved and aren't Christian and who are living like in ignorance to their sin? And I did a creative writing project with my sophomores right before we ended quarantine. I was going to share it with you guys in class when we did this message, but he wrote about how he's addicted to drugs and how he goes out with his friends every single day and they skateboard and he smokes marijuana and he does other things. And he's like, I can't, he's like, he's not a Christian. And I don't know why he shared this with me because it was really personal, but he was just like, I feel so incredibly empty and I see Satan smile. And every time my friend smiles at me, he's like, I know that they're dragging me down. I know that every time they pass a joint to me, that it's the devil working on me. And he's like, but I can't stop. He's like, I hang out with them every day and I continue to smoke every day and there's nothing I can do about it. Like, and that, like my wife, I read that to my wife and she started crying. And I'm just like, how broken this kid is and how enslaved to his sin. And everyone, you could talk to any stranger, throw a rock, hit a kid randomly, and that kid could probably share with you how empty and enslaved they are to their sin, right? And not even knowing it. A lot of them won't consciously, like this kid. I'm actually very surprised that he consciously was able to relate that. But most non-saved people, they live their life day to day, going about their business, working. What do they wake up in the morning for? For money, to go to work, just to get through school, just another day, right? Without purpose and without direction, without hope, without joy. The only thing we could do for them, the best thing we could do for them, is awaken their eyes to the sin and the slavery to that, and to give them Christ, which is a different type of slavery, but like we said, leading to salvation, hope, and joy and purpose, right?
Yeah.
So I know it's really heavy, and I wish we had more time to talk about it.
Yeah. Thank you. So I actually have to go to a class right now, but thank you guys so much.
I do too.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That was an amazing message.
Bye, Isabel.
Bye,
Yeah, guys.
bye, Isabel.
Bye.
Good. I'll stop sharing.